you have 20 years of agency and then you went to client. Let's say me as Khalid, I had 22 years of client and now I go to agency. Which one of us do you think would struggle more?
Definitely client transitioning to the agency
Really?
world, because
Really?
the client
Okay.
side is more structured,
Okay,
is more controlled,
okay.
right? Because you determine the budgets, and you're ultimately a decision maker. Whereas on the agency side, you can recommend, you can collaborate, even with the closest client-agency relationships, but ultimately it's the client say,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So I really feel that clients today who came from the agency world have an opportunity to be much more successful and much more driven than clients who've always been clients.
Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of the AUD podcast channel. We have a very special guest with us today, Mr. Aamir Allibhoy. Aamir, welcome to the show, man.
Thank you so much. Pleasure being here.
Thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it. So Aamir, me and you actually have had the pleasure of having, we had a call about a month ago to get introduced and so on, and listening to your experience and doing my research, your story is what I would call the typical marketeer story. Went through the agency, in the trenches, the grit and whatever, and then moved over to what everyone at least thinks was the fancy, nice, quiet client side. So I wanted to talk to you today, Amr, about a lot of different things. I wanted to focus on the differences between the two, because I think a lot of people in the region and a lot of young marketeers start typically on agency side like you did, and then they shift over to client. And client side always seems to be that, the grass is greener on the other side kind of thing. Touch on what is new in the marketing world and a couple of other points. But before we get into everything, Aamir, why don't you give all of us a little bit of background about yourself, and we'll take it from there.
Yeah, sure. So, I'm a proud AUD alumni. I graduated back in 2001. I did international business with a focus on marketing, and transitioned straight into the advertising world with a small company called Impact BBDO, which I spent close to 21 years with.
Yeah, I don't know how you did that.
Long time, but to be honest, to answer your question in two parts, besides the intro, the advertising world prepares you for war.
Yeah.
Because it's organized chaos, if I can call it that. So when you transition from the ad world to the client side or to any other sector, you're very well prepared to pivot and to improvise. So I'm so happy that I did spend so many years in the ad world. And to be honest, the joyful thing about advertising is the fact that you're driving to work knowing that you're going to wear different hats because you handle different clients. So you get into the office, you're talking beverages with your Pepsi client. 3 hours later, you're talking about edible oil with Savola. And 4 hours later, you're talking about softwares with IBM. So it's fantastic in terms of that diversity, in terms of that exposure.
Yeah. And so it's interesting that, like you said, advertising prepares you for war. I want to start, first of all, just real quick. Marketing and advertising. Those two things are not necessarily the same. Have I understood that correctly?
Not at all. And
okay,
to be
great.
honest,
so
sorry,
let's get
go ahead.
No, please,
sure.
no. And because this is an area that I think people think marketing is that umbrella and everything fits into it. But different areas of marketing require different skill sets and different responsibilities. So could we start just by telling us, from your experience, what's the difference between marketing and advertising?
So advertising truly is about conceptualizing and storytelling and bringing that marketing concept or product concept to life. Okay. Plain and simple. And when you're on the agency side, sometimes it gets a bit frustrating vis-a-vis your client because campaigns take so long to churn out, especially if you handle a P&G or Unilever. That takes years. But even in the case of Pepsi and fast-moving consumer goods, it was the same. And I never realized the painful process or the layered process of the client rolling out a campaign until I became a client. So 21 years later, post-BBDO, when I became the CMO for Tim Hortons, I realized that if you want to roll out a marketing campaign, you need to align with supply chain. You need to align with ops. You need to align with finance. You need to align with MPD, with R&D, with QA. So there's so many stakeholders involved, and that's the reason why it takes time. And when you roll out or activate a campaign, you want it to be as close to perfection as possible. And there's a lot of external elements that are beyond your control. So unless you have the buy-in of the multiple stakeholders across the functional team or committee of the organization, you're never going to succeed. And that's why it takes a lot of planning, it takes a lot of time, it's a layered approval process. And now I realize that vis-a-vis when I was on the agency side, I was always frustrated and say, listen, this is a trend, if we're not going to hit the iron while it's hot, so on and so forth.
Yeah, and I think that's, I love the examples you gave, because most of my friends, for example, I have a lot of them in marketing, and all of them are on agency side. So I've lived with them through, the hectic calls, the 12 a.m., I need this done now, and so on. And they always would share the same frustrations that you're talking about of, oh, the client is so difficult, and why are they so slow, but they want us to move so fast. That's always, I think there's a time lag between
True.
agency delivering and client side actually planning and, implementing. So let's just take a step back. You said agency prepares you for war, and you can sell, and in those examples, like you said, with IBM and Tavola and all these different brands selling everything and anything. And you spent 22 years, working in agency side. So I want to start first of all by understanding, what are the lessons that you learned in that experience that have helped you in your transition now to client side?
Many things, to be honest. One is the importance of not doing one-hit wonders.
Not doing one-hit wonders.
One-hit wonders. And the reason I say this, and this is a lesson that a lot of aspiring students who want to join the advertising world, or even youngsters within the advertising world, sometimes we get so carried away on trying to win awards.
Okay.
And awards will give you short-term glory and short-term success, but if the campaign or the results are not tangible, then it's not going to really take your profile or the relationship between your agency and the client very far. So, always think long-term, and that's the reason why strategy and planning is so critical in our industry. And I realize that even on the client side more so, because if I'm focusing, let's say, on donuts, it's not just a one-off campaign, right? There's a platform, there's certain RTBs, and there's a certain analysis that we do that we need to focus on a ring donut versus a yeast donut, and focus on X flavor, which is more relatable and more loved in this region versus another region. And then you have different trends, like the Dubai chocolate kunafa, that you have to build on. So you also have to be a little impromptu and creative, which advertising truly taught me so well to be prepared for. And another thing is you need to be patient and understanding. And the ad world is very stressful, as you said. Clients will take 3 months to come back to you, but when they come back to you, they want everything in 3 hours. So, you need to know how to pacify your client servicing team, how to pacify your creative team. And it's a mix of all these elements that come to life.
Yeah, no, for sure. So the podcast that I watched you on, one of the key things I took away, and from what you just said, is the granularity of like how deep you have to go in these all things. Like the example you just gave of, it's not just about a donut, like what type of donut, what shape of donut. Someone like myself, I would never think of these things. But listening to you, it blows my mind how much thought you need to put into every little aspect of this whole process. Now, the typical marketeer track, as we've been talking about, is agency, and then you go to client side. But does that always have to be the case?
No, it doesn't. And to be honest, because on the agency side, you're servicing and handling clients, and you're taking a lot of stress, not realizing what the client is going through, you assume that the grass is greener on the other side. And to be honest, also the perception is, and to some extent it's fairly true, is that client side has better benefits and a more balanced life. And to be honest, one thing I will say, because recently I was at an awards festival in Riyadh called the Athar Festival, and a good friend of mine who spent many years with me at BBDO said, Aamir, what's the difference on the agency and the client side? And I said, on the agency side, stress is not fully in your control or your hands, because ultimately it's a service industry and a client might call you at 2 a.m. On the client side, it is stressful, right? You have other tension points, no doubt, right? All of us do, irrespective of what career we choose. But you can control and dictate how stressful you want to be that day. And I love that, right?
Fair,
because it's up to me. Whereas when I was in the agency side, especially in my last 2-3 years, because I was the GM for Saudi, there was a lot of pressure. And with Saudi evolving and opening up, majority of the new business was with PIF, which is the government, and they're quite demanding because they report to His Highness. So it took its toll on me.
Yeah, I love that analogy is so true, especially about the stress, how that you can dictate it on one side where agency is a lot more reactive. I'm curious because from the things I hear from people in agencies, and you were in it for such a long time, I'm sure there were points that you would, like a client would ask you for something at like 12 p.m. or 12 a.m. that maybe when you were on the agency side, you'd be like, do you really need this now? Is it supposed to happen now? But now being on the client side, do you understand it more? Or like when you reflect, is a lot of it, this can like wait a little bit? Or it has to be that, that second?
To be honest, it's a combination. So 50%, yes, it can wait, but 50%, and building on what I touched upon earlier, because there's so many stakeholders and because there's a lot of layers, you lose a lot of time. So when you do get those approvals in place, you have very little time to churn out and execute that campaign and to utilize the budget that was allocated for that campaign. So that's when the pressure starts. And so from the agency side, he or she would be, but you had 3 months. And you're coming back to me and you expect this to happen in 3 days. And in all honesty, the fair point that comes from your agency counterpart would be that to do good work takes some time.
Yeah.
Right? So if we're expected, and I still say we because I spent so many years on the agency side, but if the client's expecting a strategic plan or a 3-year plan or a 5-year comms recommendation, it does take time because there's research, there's validation, so on and so forth. If it's just churning out a piece of content in this day and age, I'll use my iPhone and get it done. But if it's a fully integrated campaign, it takes time because there's a lot of moving parts.
I think that point is something, first of all, I've never known about or considered. And I think maybe a lot of people on agency side, because they haven't had the experience on the other side, don't understand is the time pressure you have on the client side. Although the leadway of getting that thing set up or the campaign approved or so on might take so long, the delivery is not the same. It has to happen at a much faster pace, which I think a lot of people in agencies probably aren't aware of. I think maybe there's a miscommunication of requirements between agencies and clients. Would that be fair to say?
It would be fair to say. It also depends on the relationship. So for example, I was quite fortunate that during my 20 plus years, prior to being in management, I was handling PepsiCo. And the relationship between BBDO and PepsiCo, what it was globally, regionally, and locally was just immense. We were true partners. So we had full understanding and visibility of the calendar, of the objectives, of the pain points, and what can be pushed and what could be pulled. Most of the time, and this is something I preach when I attend certain events where there are a lot of clients, that you need to be more transparent and need to be more trusting of your agency partner to get the best from them. And if they don't fully understand your business, if they don't fully understand your pain points, then they'll never be able to provide adequate solutions and recommendations to solve and tackle them.
Yeah, and I think that makes a lot of sense because it is a partnership at the end of the day. We are working together to deliver this campaign. We come up with the idea and the strategy, and you are the one to execute it. So there has to be some clarity in communication across that. Do you think there's more responsibility on the agency or the client to, I guess, deliver that message?
So there should be a willingness on the agency side, but the client is ultimately responsible for sharing critical data points because every campaign needs to be justified. We live in a day and age where every dollar deserves or requires accountability in terms of ROI. And how would I know on the agency side if a campaign was super effective from a business perspective unless the client provides me with that data?
True.
Right? I can get some insight on sentiment. I can get some insight on engagement because we live in a social digital first world. But actual business results, somebody needs to give that data to me so I can utilize that to analyze the success of the campaign and to learn and build on for the future.
I think the business insights is a great point because if me as an agency, I don't understand the value that has delivered to your business or the lack of value that has delivered to your business for the next campaign. It will be a lot harder for me to optimize and adjust in the future campaigns or future activities that we have coming up. Now that you've worked on both sides, and I know we're touching on this a lot, but I think this is an area that a lot of people I know struggle with and think about. And you're in a unique position that you have so much agency experience, and now you're on the client side of one of, largest global brands, in the world. So that's why I'm trying to, ask you a lot of these questions. Final one on this point. What do you think is easier? If you've been, let's say you have 20 years of agency and then you went to client. Let's say me as Khaled, I had 22 years of client and now I go to agency. Which one of us do you think would struggle more?
Definitely client transitioning to the agency world, because
Really?
the client side is more structured, is more controlled, right? Because you determine the budgets, and you're ultimately a decision maker. Whereas on the agency side, you can recommend, you can collaborate, even with the closest client-agency relationships, but ultimately it's the client say.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So I really feel that clients today who came from the agency world have an opportunity to be much more successful and much more driven than clients who've always been clients.
That makes a lot of sense. I think, like you said, the chaos forces you to be, I guess, more adaptable, to think on your feet, to deliver things in sometimes ridiculous deadlines compared to something that is a lot more planned out. You have more time, more structure. So I think I would agree with you then, based on what you're saying, that it probably would be easier to switch from client to agency to client than client to agency. I want to transition, Aamir, onto another area that I think is very important, which is localization. So everyone talks about this. You need to localize your content, you need to make it deliver in the right message with the right tone. So you've said in the past that Dubai is a bubble. It's not an accurate representation of the Arab world. And you mentioned it's crucial for agencies to localize the content, not just in the language, but also what I really was surprised in my research when you were talking was, like, if you're talking to Egypt and you're talking to Saudi, the dialect is also going to have a massive impact, which brings me back to what I was saying earlier on the granularity. So let's say I come to you and okay, I want to now advertise to the Arabic population in this region. Everyone tells me, like, you're going to tell me, okay, Khalid, you need to localize your content. Great. I want to know now, don't tell me to localize content, tell me how do I do that? What are the processes or things I need to be thinking about or doing to localize that content? And I guess, what does localizing the content mean as an essence?
So I was brought into the Tim Hortons world because our HQ was previously Dubai-based.
Yeah.
And all of us have lived in Dubai or live in Dubai, and sometimes Dubai becomes the center of the universe.
True.
Where Saudi is this massive market, only 90 minutes away, which is very different and very unique and not as diverse because 70% plus of the population are local, ultimately, and it's a very young population, right? Gen Z and millennials mostly. So I was brought to Tim Hortons when they shifted their RHQ from Dubai to Riyadh for this very purpose.
Okay.
To truly localize, and let's talk about localizing. And when we talk about localizing, it's on a content and comms level, it's also on a brand and product level. Because ultimately, when you're an international brand entering a very unique local market, you have to maintain your international standards and values, but you need to connect with the local audience. And post-COVID, and especially when you're talking to a young audience who are consistently and constantly on their screens, you're talking about an audience that is super exposed. So if you don't stay true to your values and you try to be a brand that you're not, that's the first mistake when localizing.
Okay.
Right? So you have to stay true to your values, true to your persona and profile. Obviously, first steps first, talk to them in their language.
Yeah.
And before going into granular detail, everything for us used to be English once upon a time, right? As in, even the agency that we were working with were French and probably had never been to Saudi, with no disrespect,
No,
right?
of course, yeah.
But it was all about one size fits all, which is not the case. So when it comes to Saudi, first and foremost, it's Arabic first.
Yeah, for sure.
Right? As in not to alienate other audiences, but it is Arabic first. And coming into the granular details, when you're talking to someone in the central region, which is Najd, then you can have colloquial expressions and nuances that are more Najdi. When you're talking to an audience in Jeddah, which is Hijaz, then it's more Hijazi. And you can spot the difference in 4 seconds when you're speaking to a copywriter on the agency side who's from Makkah region or from the central region. And it makes a big difference because I'm not going to say that they take it personally, but if I want to connect with you as Khalid and I talk to you in a language that you prefer or in a manner that you prefer, chances are you will connect with me much faster.
Absolutely.
Or you will take me more seriously. So that's something to take into consideration from a language, linguistics, and nuance purpose. But it's also about how to communicate and what to communicate. So for example, Saudi is a black coffee market. And Riyadh in specific, because it's more Bedouin inspired and hardcore Saudi, we focus a lot on brewed coffee in our communication. Whereas when we talk to customers in Jeddah or the Eastern Province, because of the Aramco exposure and the rest of the GCC, those customers and markets are more espresso based. So we focus more on Americanos, lattes, cappuccinos. So even when it comes to localizing, you have to understand what content are you pushing, because ultimately content has to satisfy an objective.
Yeah.
Right? So even the products that you're pushing have to be localized, right? So that's how granular it gets.
Yeah.
And you can see the difference in 2 minutes. So when I first joined Tim Hortons back in 2022, August, Saudi National Day was 1 month later. And the CEO is like, Aamir, we have 30 days to whip up a nice tactical campaign. So in our part of the world until recently, where everything became so much more value-driven, coffee was double digits. All right, especially with the whole Starbucks phenomena where people were willing to pay a premium because they called your name when they served you a cup. But back then, I wanted to test the threshold of value.
Okay.
And it was the 90-something Saudi National Day, so we did a very simple but effective value proposition, which was a coffee and a donut for 9 riyals. And I don't think the market has ever witnessed this, right? Because it was always double digits. So my campaign kicked off, and because I get MIS reports every day, I'm able to have data at my fingertips. And within 3-4 days, I realized that the campaign was very effective in Riyadh, but not as effective in Jeddah, and I was still new to the game. So I spoke to the operations team, I looked into the data, and then I realized that my promotion is on brewed coffee and a donut. So brewed coffee is black coffee. And then Ops is like, yeah, but there's more expats in Jeddah, and even the Jeddawis are far more exposed because of Makkah, so a lot of foreigners came in or they married non-Saudis, so they're more espresso-based. So I didn't realize that. So because we're in a fluid world where we can optimize pretty fast, I modified and tweaked the offering for the Western region, where you can have a brewed coffee or an espresso with the donut, and then the promotion started flying. So, these insights, and they sound very basic in nature, but they could be game changers.
Exactly. And so it's so funny you said that the changes might be small, but it's all about stacking those, additional 1%. All
100%.
That, every little change I can do, this might mean nothing, but changing, the targeting, changing, adding the espresso in the example that you just said, that alone might not be much, but if we do a lot of these little things together, that's going to produce a big result. So just reflecting on what you said, so as an international brand, you have to stick to your values. That's your persona. That's very important. But you do have to localize. What was so interesting in what you said was it wasn't just like, targeted for, in the example, what I was saying of like Saudi and Egypt. It's even within Saudi, you have to have different strategies. You have to have different products that you're kind of pushing.
100%.
Which is very surprising to me. Because I'm the worst guy to probably know this stuff, but it's crazy how granular you have to be and how, especially in such a fast-moving business like yours, which people are coming in, day out. You have SKUs on every single product. Okay, so you said you get the data every day. Now, this is something I think about when it comes to marketing. So I'd love to hear your perspective. When it comes to there's data and there's a time factor, but your situation is a bit unique because to truly know the success of a campaign, as you know with marketing, things do take time, and you always are looking to optimize and improve and so on. But you also have to kind of give it, or whatever campaign or promotion you're running, the time to truly know if it needs to be optimized or it doesn't need just a little bit more time to hit. So when you're getting data every day, I'm sure that you're looking at that like, okay, today, well, let's switch this around, push this product a bit more in this region or whatever the case might be. How do you manage the time factor? Because it's a significant factor to determine the success of a campaign. You don't want to be too early in changing things, but you also don't want to be too late.
100%. And to be honest, this is really critical in my business because in the F&B retail sector, whatever you don't sell by midnight goes into the bin. And that results in wastage, that results in higher food costs, that results in more pressure on our margins. So it's very critical for us to know that we're doing the right thing, because if not, it's going to put more pressure on operations and the store team, and we spoke about donuts earlier, and even my humble competition, Dunkin' Donuts and Krispy Kreme, who do fried donuts, even they face wastage issues,
I'm sure,
right? And
yeah.
With Tim Hortons, our mantra is always fresh, because everything that we serve is freshly prepared in-house. So be it our donuts, be it our sandwiches, as in if you go to a Starbucks or you go to a Costa, if you want something to eat, it's in a plastic wrap. And then you have the option of zapping it in a microwave. We don't have microwaves in Tim Hortons. We have turbo chefs and ovens, right? So the whole process is a la Subway to some extent. So it's quite a complex process that we're banking on. But what this also puts a lot of pressure on us as a company and the different functions is the fact that because everything is fresh per se, the shelf life is not as extended as others. So time is against you. So when we're churning out a campaign, obviously, as you said, it takes some time to truly understand how effective that campaign was or that product or innovation was, because we launch a lot of LTOs, limited time offers. But thankfully, because we're responsible for 300 plus stores across markets, I have operational managers and an operations team and a store team to interact with. And they would have a good pulse if something is clicking or not, because you have a lot of regular customers. And those regular customers do have their go-to drink or their go-to donut or go-to sandwich, but they're also quite open to trying something based on a recommendation. So early on, within 5 to 6 days, you get a good initial feedback if something is clicking and has potential or not.
And that's, I think, like you said, your situation is quite unique. I didn't consider the wastage that adds pressure. So the time factor for you guys is even probably more pressing, and you probably have to act a lot quicker than you would to avoid having more losses or affecting your margins.
100%, because keep in mind that we're also living in a tumultuous world where shipping takes quite a bit of time, given what's happening in the Red Sea and so on and so forth. So when you roll out a campaign and supply chain places an order, you have to do it 2 to 3 months in advance. And if you don't get your planning, your demand planning correct, then either you could have ordered more or you could have ordered less. And if you've ordered less, you're in trouble, because if you want to replenish, it's going to take another 2 months. And customers will not wait. So the biggest nightmare in the F&B retail world is to be out of stock.
Yeah.
I think that a lot of advertising guys who are more chill would say, no, being out of stock is good because it'll create, fear of missing out. But the reality is that customers are not as forgiving as they come across. And once they're accustomed to something, and they want it. And if they don't have it for 2-3 days, that's one thing. But if they don't have it for 2-3 weeks, they'll move on.
100%.
So that's the nature of the beast.
Man, listening to like just the supply chain and logistics of your of Tim Hortons must be that the spreadsheets you guys must have, and the fact that it's also broken down into like SKU per product per region. That's an incredible undertaking to like manage all of that. And I guess if from my perspective, I guess you guys would have a margin of error in terms of supply. Like let's say we're buying 3 months worth, but you might buy 3.5 just in case if
100%,
that, you know, there has to be some
100%.
margin there
there's
for
a
that.
percentage on top
Yeah.
that is taken into consideration, especially for our core products, naturally, because that's not something that you can
You can't run out of that.
play around with. And to be honest, it also depends, because certain products are sourced locally and regionally, which doesn't put a lot of pressure on you. But certain products that Tim Hortons regards very highly in terms of quality, consistency, and gold standard, we need to procure from abroad. And that's what takes time. So our coffee beans, our donuts, even our bagels, we couldn't get good spec bagels, because when you go to London, New York, Canada, you can eat bagels every 2 minutes,
100%.
right? And it's hard to match that here, in all honesty, unless you go to a specialized bakery. But when you go to a Tim Hortons, we really have good bagels. And there's a reason for that.
Yeah, no, that's true. That's true. So we've talked about the logistics behind it, the supply chain side of this. We've talked about localizing the content. Now, another thing you said, which I thought was very interesting and very relevant, and this is an area that even myself as a podcaster for my own, that I've heard it many times, but I'm still coming to terms with it in the sense of platforms and targeting. So it was interesting the way you guys went about it with these I think it was called thematical campaigns. So you'll pick a small subset of an audience, you'll target them with this new product, and that will give you an indication of the success or not success of this campaign or this product. What was also interesting to me is not just selecting the right platform, the right platform for the right customer, you also have to have the right message. So cross-promoting something that works on Instagram versus TikTok versus LinkedIn, yeah, it might be the same video, but maybe the copy needs to be different. Maybe it needs to be a little bit shorter. Maybe it needs to be a little bit longer.
100%.
So when you guys are launching such campaigns and you're looking at targeting and platforms, you probably need a combination of all of them, but I feel, from my perspective, it's quite difficult because each platform in a way and each audience you're targeting is a science in itself. There's rules for Instagram, there's rules for TikTok, there's rules for LinkedIn, for Meta. So how do you guys kind of bring that together? That's something that I from my perspective, that must be quite a headache on top of the headache that we've already discussed.
So it also depends and is linked to if the communication and messaging is more equity-driven or more tactical-driven in nature, because that also allows you to determine where you want to invest. Because, for example, outdoor is super effective because it's short-term, high impact, but it's also super expensive. So if you have a new product or if you have something tactical like a value proposition or promotion, then outdoor really is worth it because it is linked to time. But if you're pushing coffee credentials and you want people to know that my coffee beans are of a certain grade and they're 100% premium Arabica, I don't need to invest millions in outdoor in 2 weeks, but I will invest millions on social media across multiple platforms across a few months. And as you said, depending on the platform, the content has to be specific. So for example, on Instagram, it needs to be more visual driven. To be honest, Instagram's now become a visual menu for me. Every time you want to look at a restaurant, or even 100%. When you go to a restaurant, you don't even scan the QR code in the menu post-COVID, you look at the Instagram account.
Absolutely.
Whereas when it comes to Twitter, it's more about language and about copy. And when it comes to TikTok and Snap, it's all about engaging visual content. And I'm lucky that I come from an advertising space, so I know all the rules of engagement. So I'm able to educate my team on how to interact and engage with our agency partners because it does make a difference, right? And again, we're living in an age where CFOs are playing a more integral role in analyzing and evaluating your marketing spends and budgets, so you need to make sure that every dollar counts. And another thing, and thank God I came from the advertising world, is the fact that over time, content has become more snackable.
Yes.
Right? During my days, we used to pride ourselves in doing a 30 or 60-second commercial. And Khalid and my audience wouldn't have a choice because there was only NBC back in the day.
True.
And you're watching Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, and then during the break you see a 60-second ad, and everyone's going to see it.
Yeah.
And even when it comes to outdoor, I was recently moderating a session at the Athar Festival in Riyadh, and I had the MD of Dentsu, who's ex-BBDO, and then I had the MD of a massive outdoor company called Saudi Science. And I was saying that, 15, 20 years ago, all these outdoor spaces and faces were static. So when you did a campaign, everyone, including the pets, are going to see the campaign, and chances are you're going to do well. But today, there's an advantage and disadvantage. The disadvantage is the fact that you're sharing space with multiple brands. But the advantage is that everything has become digitized. So your content can be more interesting, and you can modify your content. So for example, we did a campaign last summer, and because everything is digital, in the morning we pushed our breakfast offer, and in the afternoon we focused on refreshing beverages. Whereas 15 years ago, you could only choose one creative and one message. But the reason I talk about content and messaging and storytelling needing to be snackable is for the following reasons. So because we're living in a very digital mobile first age, and everybody is on multiple screens, whether it's for gaming or for other reasons, our attention span has reduced. And once upon a time, we used to make fun of a goldfish, right? For having only 9 seconds of attention span. If you Google it, as we say, it is now scientifically proven that us humans have an attention span that is even less than a goldfish.
Yes, that's true.
I think it's 8.4 seconds, if I recall correctly, which makes you wonder, but that also makes you realize that you have less than 8 seconds to capture their attention, to tell a story, and to make an impact.
Yeah.
And I learned this from the world of advertising, because ultimately, Khalid, irrespective of the industry you're in, whether you're talking B2B, B2C, or B2G, which is business to government, ultimately, the end user that you're trying to reach is a human being with a beating heart and a vibrant soul. And if you can capture his or her imagination and make an impact, then you'll be memorable.
Yeah.
And you have very little time to do so.
No, for sure. And I love the examples you were giving of how things used to be back then and the advantages and disadvantages. Like those billboards that we were talking about, for example, that we see, on Sheikh Zayed. For me, from my perspective, again, I don't know. It just seems like such a waste to me because, that's, God knows how, first of all, it's massive and it's there for months on end. Yeah, and okay, I'm going to speak from personal experience, Yani. I've never been driving down the road looking at the billboard and be like, you know what, I'm in the mood for some like Huawei headsets now. It's just not going to, it just doesn't happen to me.
Yes.
Doesn't mean I'm right, doesn't mean I'm wrong. They must be doing it for a reason. But like you said, things have become a lot more digital. Even for myself as a podcaster, as a content creator, when I'm trying to create like clips now on social media, they tell you there's a science behind that and there's data that you've got 3 seconds, especially on like TikTok. If you don't capture your attention in 3 seconds, they're scrolling onto that next video. So not only has it become, it's opened up a lot more opportunities on how to deliver that content, but now you have like a whole science behind like that hook. And it's all about, the first 3 seconds to get you the next 5 and then the next thing. So you have to break it down even more granular than how you guys were probably even doing it at when it was 30 seconds or 60
100%.
seconds, which is crazy to me. You talked about in that last podcast, and you mentioned it earlier in the conversation about tension points. When you talk about tension points, that's something I personally didn't really understand what you were talking about. Does that mean pain points that you're trying to address, or could you elaborate on what are tension points, how you use them, and maybe an example just so we can understand what that looks like?
So broadly speaking, when I talk about tension points as a marketeer, I'm talking about tension points that a customer experiences or is facing. And this could be driven by a behavior or a cultural insight or a behavioral shift. So for example, during COVID, we were all contained. So a lot of us had to rely on delivery, right? So all these delivery aggregators, Talabat, Hunger Station, became giants, whereas I had no clue who they were 5 years ago, right? But from a human nature perspective, we started seeking more convenience, and we became a bit lazy in nature. So when it comes to my business, and you look at Saudi specifically, because in the UAE, to be very honest, when you go to coffee shops, it still is a third space.
Yeah.
All right? And we have these beautiful community tables, and you have people set up on their laptops who come in at 9 a.m. and leave at 9 p.m. But in Saudi, it's a different ballgame, because 5 years ago in Saudi, we didn't have cinemas. We didn't have these amazing malls. We didn't have Ronaldo. We didn't have Riyadh Seasons. So F&B was a source of entertainment.
Yeah.
So we would go to coffee shops, we would go to Chili's to have fun, and if they had a kids area, even better. So everybody would have fun. But today, with Saudi opening up, visitation to F&B and retail has dipped, and customers are looking for convenience. So when it comes to my sector, customers have no issues waiting 10 minutes in their car for a cup of coffee and a donut, and they will stay in the drive-through lane. Whereas me, as Aamir, till today, if I go into a Tim Hortons or a competitor and ask for X and Y, if I don't get it within 2 minutes, I'll say, your customer service, speed, turnaround, what is this?
True.
So we need to adapt according to those tension points and according to those insights.
I see.
So that's a classic example when it comes to coffee. When it comes to delving further into retail, with the rise of e-commerce, with the rise of laziness, and with the rise of convenience, when's the last time you went to a mall to buy something? As in, yes, some people prefer trying it, but even if you order via e-commerce, you can try it. If you're not happy, you can return it. And Shein and all these different brands and Temu and God knows what, they're dominating, right? Yeah. And to be honest, you know, there's one thing about the regional conflict that propelled certain things, but at the same time, value, right? The world has become a more expensive place, right? And I look at my wife, Nasreen, right? And Nasreen likes her fashion and likes specific brands. And then I see certain boxes appear. And I wonder, like, what's this? What's going on? And when I talk to Nasreen, and when I talk to a couple of friends who rely a lot on e-commerce and delivery, they gave me a very interesting insight, which is, if I spend 5,000 riyals a quarter at Zara, I'll get 7 or 8 good things, correct? And Zara and Mango and Mosimo are good value, good quality, latest trend. Whereas if I order from Trendyol or Shein, I will get 60 or 70 things, and then I will decide what 6 or 7 things I'd like to use or wear.
Yeah.
I'm like, that's great logic. I don't know if I buy into it, but to be honest, it is what it is, right? And especially if you are a parent and you're paying for your child's education and worrying about his or her future, so you want to save, then you tend to realize that, you know, if I want to buy him PJs or I want to buy him shorts, then ordering online is not a bad deal.
Yeah.
So why not?
Thank you so much for sharing that example regarding tension points. Especially the fashion one is an area that I can, relate to. My wife does the same thing. But like you said, the world is moving to more convenience. It's moving to a place that it almost seems that that's the main factor that you're going to be competing in over the next, 5-10 years. And having things like drive-thrus and so on. As long as you're making it easier on me as a consumer, I don't mind. But the example you gave of, if you go into a store and you're making me, wait a certain amount of time, probably not going to come back to that store because there's so many other options for me out there. So I wanted to round off our conversation today, Aamir, with just 2-3 more questions. One of them is surrounding data. Now, data, as you know, and as we've been talking throughout our whole conversation today, is crucial. To optimize and to do it, we have to take into account the time factor as well and so on. Now, I had someone on my podcast recently, and he really opened my mind a lot to the concept of data. One of the things he said, which really was interesting to me, is not just about data. It's, number one, how am I interpreting that data?
Yeah.
Another aspect that he talked about was with like a campaign or an activation or whatever. Yes, there's things you can track, but also, and you mentioned this earlier in our conversation, when it comes to marketing, there are unknown elements that are taking place that you can't measure that are also contributing to either the success or lack of success of a campaign. So he said, you need to have, so data is crucial, but you also need to be comfortable with the concept of the unknown and the unknown variables that are going to come into play. So just love to hear your thoughts like surrounding data and all of that.
So I truly believe in the value of data, and that's why my preference and my recommendation to anyone in the marketing sphere would be to have a data analytics member on your team, because they can make a massive difference. Having said that, a lot of companies tend to invest in different data-driven platforms, right? Be it CX linked or otherwise. But the reality is, number one, unless you have a competent team member who's able to evaluate those data points and extract the right data that can be converted into actionable insights, then it's a waste to invest in these platforms, and it's a waste of data.
Yeah.
Right? Because a lot of clients and others, beat their chest and flex their muscles saying, I've partnered with X platform and Y platform.
Sure.
But it's about how to effectively extract the correct data that can be utilized. Number two, when it comes to the unknown, and again, God bless the fact that I was in advertising for 22 years and exposed to so many unknowns across so many sectors, that's where experience plays a role. So not everything is tangible, right? You cannot justify everything or justify something so soon, because certain things take time. If you want to change a habit, if you want to change a behavior, if you want to change a mindset, it doesn't happen because supposedly a campaign or a piece of content went viral. It requires more than that, because you're expecting the end user to step out of his or her comfort zone. So it takes time and it takes effort.
Yeah.
And that's why when it comes to the unknown, and some things can be a hit and miss, as they say, you need to be bold and you need to be creative, right? Because you have one opportunity. And then it works, it doesn't work. Some things are in your control and in your hands, some things are not. But all these factors come into play.
Yeah.
And that's why when you do roll out a campaign, and you mentioned earlier that when you see a billboard on Sheikh Zayed Road, it doesn't convince you to consider a Huawei, for example, right? But that's why integrated marketing comms is so important, because that's just one aspect of a campaign. So that when you go into a store and you see a section in Virgin for Huawei, you'll be like, okay, I did see the latest Huawei on that billboard, so why not check it out?
Okay.
So different touch points.
Okay.
And then there's a full circle element to it. So it's an omni-channel journey.
Yeah.
Right? And we're living in a very fluid world where strategic plan and marketing plans cannot be written for 3 years, 2 years, or not even 1 year. I think you need to revisit your consumer journey funnel and your omni-channel approach every 3 to 4 months to make sure that it's being optimized and it's still relevant.
Exactly. And the integrated aspect is something, again, I'm not a marketer, that I didn't consider, because I was looking at it as an isolated thing. In the billboard example, I'm like, this is not doing anything.
100%.
I just know, okay, I know you're there, cool. But it's all, I maybe didn't understand or appreciate that that's just one part of everything else digitally that's going on, the messaging, the platforms, everything we've kind of talked about today. And like you said with, campaigns and data, you can't measure everything, and there are things that are going to be unknown. And unfortunately, with marketing or with a campaign, for example, you do only have one chance to get this campaign right.
Correct.
This specific one. There will be more in the future. You will take the learnings and you will make them better. But this one, like you said, there only is one chance. So you need to don't let the fear of maybe it failing stop you from being creative and trying something new, because if it might not work on this one, maybe that will come in a lot more handy down the line. And you mentioned customer experience. So I know you guys, it was mind-blowing to me the amount you guys invest and attention to detail into like the tables in your store, the color of like the counter. Like, again, coming back to everything we've talked about, granular. But you said you'd consider it, if I was a customer and came and we just had a transaction, you'd consider that to be a failure. And you want them to have an emotive experience because that's something you can build on in the future. So looking at that as an example, because, and you said it earlier, there's equity and there's a tactical element. Tactically, you might have succeeded, but on equity, maybe not so much. So how do you measure the value or the success of the experience now you're giving me as a customer? Because there's so many things to take into consideration. And it's probably not just if I came back once. There's probably a bit more than that.
100%. And customers are quite vocal about their experiences and quite vocal about what they want and what they don't want and what can be better. And we have a CX team member, and we do invest in platforms, and we have community managers on the agency side who are constantly feeding us with customer feedback that we can evaluate and utilize as well as escalate. Because if a customer had a bad experience, the last thing I want is for him or her to keep that bad experience or keep that sour taste. So as soon as they express their point of view, within a couple of hours, or let's say within 24 hours to be fair, they'll get a call from the operations team saying, you know, Khalid, I'm really sorry for your experience today. Can you come by so I can give you a free and better espresso or free donut tomorrow, just to change your perception? And that's something we take very seriously. And we are creating more avenues for the customer to give his or her feedback. So when you enter a Tim Hortons, next to the till, there's a QR code that says we care. And we genuinely mean it, right? Otherwise, we wouldn't make that effort. So we care. When you buy something on the receipt, there's another domain that you can click on, and if you fill out a survey, you get a free donut. And it's not just about giving the free donut, but we really want to create a strong incentive for you to take the time and to fill out the survey, because we truly believe that we need to cater to your experience or your palate or your behavior or your aspirations. So we look at all of this, and every single department is responsible for looking at customer feedback and customer experience drivers, and that's something we take very seriously. Yeah,
and I think that is the only way to really measure it, getting feedback from the customers, because otherwise you're not going to know, was it this specific thing that we did, was it the barista, or was it the speed at which we delivered the thing. So,
and even when it comes to, by the way, you spoke about it, the furniture, right? So we know that the coffee space is the third space, and people come and they want to work. So we created these community tables, right, where you can sit ergonomically on your laptop, and there's charging stations. Now we also have wireless chargers for mobiles in many of our stores, so you just keep your phone and it's charged, and we have good Wi-Fi. So you have to take all these factors into consideration, not just to build an experience, but to retain a customer and make sure that he or she spends more time than maybe they would have expected in your space.
Yeah, and I think that's the best measure, you know, like how long were you here for, and how good of a time did you have? I think those two, if you drill it down, it's going to come down to those two things. Aamir, I want to first of all say thank you so much for coming on the show today, man. This has been an absolute pleasure. I've learned so much from you. I think anyone in marketing can take so much away from this conversation. So I really, really appreciate, you know, your time and sharing your knowledge and experience with us. Our last question that we ask all our guests, and the message with this podcast has always been, success comes in many forms and learning never stops. And I believe on the way throughout your career, or even personally, we all learn many things in life. But I always feel there's one specific learning that really changed the game for every single person. So what was your game changer learning, if you had to pinpoint it?
So two things, if you don't mind. And the first was ironically inspired by the ex-president of AUD, which was Lance Demasi, because many may not know that prior to turning to academia, he spent 30 years in the advertising world with BBDO and Leo Burnett. So when I was attending his classes, where literally you weren't allowed to bring a notebook, because he said if you pay attention, you'll get a C, and that'll be very good. He really taught us the art of captivation and storytelling. And that's something that I have kept alongside everything that I do myself, or even when I preach and educate to others. That's number one. Number two, when it comes to success, and my current CEO, Hisham, is just a great leader and very inspiring, and always tells us that you will never succeed unless you fail, right? And you have to step out of your comfort zone, and you have to try things maybe for the very first time to really know if it works or does not work. Worst case, it will fail. It's not the end of the world, as long as you learn from it.
Yes.
If you do not learn from it, then you will never reach success or that pinnacle.
Yeah. No, 100%, man. The storytelling aspect that, as a lesson is something that I think even now today, with how digital everything has become and our attention span is becoming an even more important skill to learn. And of course, on, the failure side, you've said it, I've said it, everyone said it, many times. No one got to where they did without failure along the way, because the lessons they learned from that is what took them to get there. And honestly, if you haven't failed before, then the win doesn't mean as much either. Doesn't feel as good.
100%.
Aamir, thank you so much again for coming on the show today, man. Thank you for your time. Any final words to send us off?
No, as in I'm really happy to be on this podcast, and I'm really happy that this also reinforces AED alumni, because, I think AED and the alumni world have come a long way, right? So this is a brilliant platform to share our stories, share our learnings, and for others to know, right? So thank you so much. Honestly, this has been a pleasure.
Thank you so much, Aamir. Thank you guys for listening, and we will see you all next time. Take care.